Thinking about launching a podcast but overwhelmed by all the moving parts? At Turnkey Podcast Productions, we take the hassle out of podcasting so you can focus on the talk, not the tech. From concept to launch, guest booking to post-production, we handle everything. Need a strategy to grow your show and turn guests into clients? Yep, we do that too. DIY or done for you, we've got the solution that fits. Whether you're just getting started or ready to scale, Turnkey is your behind-the-scenes podcast team. Turnkey Podcast Productions. Your voice, your message, fully produced. Learn more at turnkeypodcast.com/contact. That's turnkeypodcast.com/contact.
Next on this episode of The Nice Guys on Business.
Find an estate planning lawyer. That means not your divorce lawyer who also does estate planning, not your cousin who thinks, they took a wills and trust class in law school. This area of the law can be really complicated, and the consequences of getting it wrong can be very high because you only get one chance ultimately to get it right. The documents in place when you pass or when you have an issue of incapacity, those are the documents that are going to be in play. And so you need them to work and be right and be good. We focus on this. A lot of my peers focus on this. So find that attorney that you work well with, that you feel comfortable with, that you think is going to do a good job with them. Call them up, drop them an email, and start that conversation. Every estate planning lawyer is going to have an intake process. Follow along with the process and follow their advice. They're probably going to be very nice people and do a good job.
They're wanted in 45 states, not wanted in the other 5. Go from where you are now to where you could be. Get expert tips to grow your business, to be more productive and more efficient, whether you're trying to build influence, grow your community, or make it rain. Best-selling author of Nice Guys Finish First, Doug Sandler, can lead the way. The Nice Guys on Business is produced by Turnkey Podcast Productions. Now, here's your host, Doug Sandler.
All right, welcome back to the show, Nice Guy Community. Today's guest is Eido Walny, founder of Walny Legal Group, a boutique estate planning firm. Now, he's a sought-after speaker. He's featured across print, TV, radio. He's a consultant and an editor and an expert in all things financial. And a guy who can draft a rock-solid estate plan by day and restore a classic car by night. I want to talk to you about that also. Estate law, cufflinks, and carburetors. Eido's got skills. Eido also brings a deeply personal perspective on why estate planning matters after a sobering experience involving his own son that underscored the importance of having powers of attorney, HIPAA documents in place, and all things legal. Eido, I'm excited to chat with you and hear your story. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Doug. I'm excited to be here.
I want to dive into a bunch of those things, but I want to talk classic cars first for a quick second.
Sure.
Are you restoring one right now?
I'm working on several cars at once. I've got a nice little collection that I keep together in my garage that I haven't, not at my house. I have an actual garage. But yeah, I started with a 1927 Model T that I restored, and then it grew and grew and grew. So I'm working on a 1964 Chevy Corvair Monza convertible right now, and also a 1964 Chevy 500.
All right, you're a Chevy guy, it seems like, except for that Model A. So I'm a Ford guy. I have 4 of them myself, 3 classic trucks, 67, 67, and 73, and then the 65 Mustang convertible. And they're all in various stages of restoration. The Mustang is complete. Well, is it ever complete?
No.
As soon as you finish, you're like, I really want to fix that part too. So I'm always getting to that. Okay, we'll talk cufflinks a little bit later, maybe if we have time, but I think I really want to get into the important stuff while you're here today. Tell me a little bit about what you said some statistics before I hit record, and they were really very, very alarming to me. A guy that now has an estate plan in place and a will and a power of attorney and all of the things in place that my attorney said I should have. But it took me nearly until 60 years old to put those things in place. Tell me, when should people actually start thinking about that kind of stuff?
So the statistic you're referencing is one that literally keeps me up at night. So that number for your audience is that only about 40% of the US population has any estate planning documents, which is crazy. But it gets crazier because of the 40%, only about 40% of those have current documents for their situation, meaning their financial situation, the laws haven't changed, there hasn't been a change in their family structure, like a divorce or birth or death. So running those things together, you quickly can figure out that only about 16%, 16% of the US population has a good current estate plan for their situation. That is a crazy, crazy number. I mean, it's great for business, right? Because there's no shortage of clientele. But I think about all those people out there who just don't have anything. So you ask about when this should start to be a conversation. And you referenced earlier in the introduction a situation that we had in my own family. I always recommend that as soon as you turn 18, there are some very basic documents you need to get in place. Now, that doesn't mean a will, and it certainly doesn't mean a trust. It means some basic powers of attorney and basic HIPAA authorizations. I think parents have this illusion that because they're their kids' hotel and laundromat and bank and restaurant, that when a situation comes up, they can play that card with the bank or with the school or the police. And that's just not the case. I mean, at 18, whether we like to admit it or not, you're an adult, and adulting comes with certain rights that aren't going to be trumped by the fact that your mom or your dad. And it's just a nice opportunity to introduce a kid to an attorney and have that business card in their back pocket. For us, we got basic documents for our kids as soon as they turned 18. My son signed a healthcare power of attorney, a durable power of attorney, and HIPAA authorizations one day after he turned 18. And little did we know that when he was 19, he was going to be in a serious accident, and we're going to have to activate all of those documents. But good heavens, I'm happy we had them because they made an absolutely tangible impact on his situation. And so I'm happy we had them. Beyond that, things happen, right? So it's good to have powers of attorney if you're a single person.
Yeah.
Certainly by the time you're married or have kids or have some money to rub together or you've got a house, these are all good pickup points for planning. So the bottom line is anytime after you're 18 is a good time to start doing this. And these are living documents, right? They've got to get updated over the course of your life. It's that they're not a chicken rotisserie oven where you can set it and forget it. And so you're going to have to update these every once in a while, but it's really good to have them. And I can speak from not only professional, but personal experience. They make a difference when you need them.
All right, let's talk to the people that are out there that haven't even begun that process of putting these together and maybe the consequences of not having these documents. So we can use your personal situation, or if that's too tender right now, we certainly can talk about any scenario where somebody is older than 18, their parents have to make some decisions for them. Talk about the consequences if you don't have that information together. What happens?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an open book, so I'm happy to share my personal situation. So my son was in a very bad accident. He is unconscious at the hospital for a number of days. He eventually wakes up with more tubes coming out of his head than there are holes in his head, and has a head injury, and he's angry and has all the things that go along with having a significant traumatic brain injury. And so one of the things, he's a smart kid, and so one of the things he quickly figures out, even though he's not in his right mind, is I'm an adult and I want to get out of here. And so we had to activate his healthcare power of attorney so that he didn't have the opportunity to leave, because literally the hospital staff is telling us, short of a court order, if he's demanding to leave, we have to let him go.
Right.
And this is crazy, right? He was just in a really severe accident. Concurrently, he was 2 weeks from leaving for college. And so we call up his college and say, hey, he's not going to be able to come. And they say, well, that's all fine and good, but we need to hear this from him because as an adult, he signed the tuition contract, the housing contract, the food contract, right? Like there's 5 different contracts that go along with going to college. And we said, well, he's not going to be able to talk to you for quite a while, but we're his powers of attorney. Can we do this for him? Oh, as soon as we dropped the power of attorney word, all we had to do was fax that over, email it over, and literally everything was worked out the next day. So this was the difference between us not only managing this traumatic issue for our family, but now having to worry perhaps for weeks or months about tuition being owed and contracts being fulfilled with the college until he can contact them, with it literally being wrapped up the next day.
Wow, what an incredible change of events that would have been had he had the ability and the he certainly sounded like he had the mental capacity to do it, even though that was not the right way for him to go. You guys had to really activate that power of attorney to make it happen. Is there any formality involved if you say I have power of attorney, you show whoever that is that you need to show it to, and he still says, "Look, I don't care what you want me to do. This is what I am doing." Who has the ultimate power to make a decision?
The doctors are so if you have powers of attorney, the doctors are the ones who activate it. So they'll be the ones, rightfully so, right? They're in a medical position to be able to say, well, sure, he's awake and talking, but he's not in his right mind. Because who in their right mind is going to be sitting in a hospital with 20 tubes coming out of their head saying, yeah, I think tonight's the night I'm going to go home. Most of us in our right minds will say, I'll go home when the doctor says I'm ready to go home. When you have a brain injury, that's not how you're thinking. So they're the ones who activate the document and then eventually deactivated it as he got healthier. And thankfully, I can tell people he's gotten a lot better. If you don't have those documents, the doctors are put in a really difficult position because they can't just commit him. He's an adult. He theoretically, because there aren't these documents in place and he hasn't agreed to let a doctor make these determinations, now you've got to go and petition a court for guardianship of the person. There's got to be a hearing. A judge is going to have to make a determination. You are leaving things to significant chance, additional cost. A judge as opposed to a doctor, it is not the position I would recommend anyone put themselves in. Layered on top of the fact that when are you doing this, right? Not a random Tuesday, but
Right.
after some sort of traumatic situation.
Right.
And it's just one more layer of hassle and heartache and cost on top of that other traumatic issue.
Okay, let's go back for just a second. And while certainly we don't want anybody in our community to have to deal with an emergency where a power of
Nope.
attorney or anything like that is coming into play, let's just talk about a basic estate plan. What's the purpose of an estate plan for someone, and how does a will fit into an estate plan, and maybe some other legal forms or some other legal processes that you have to go through? What is the trust for? I mean, I'm sorry, what is the estate plan for?
Yep. So the estate plan is a plan that you put in place to direct who is going to do what for you when you can no longer do it, either because of incapacity or death, and then provides hopefully an orderly process for just the disposition of your assets. If you don't have that and you have nothing, the court will give you your estate plan. So the every state has what we call the laws of intestacy. The laws of intestacy are the one size fits all statutes that get implemented on people who don't go through the effort of putting an estate plan in place. Now, uh, the government doesn't care about your tax situation. The government doesn't care about your kids' family situation, your interpersonal situation, right? They don't care about any of that. It's a one size fits all process, and it always goes through probate. And so, if you want to elect out of that or do what you want and have the people you want named to do these things, that's what the estate plan is for. Sometimes that is going to be based on a will. Wills are documents that you sign that go through probate until the moment you die. It's a pile of paper with ink on it, and the only place where it has governance is in the probate court. Or you can go other routes. There are beneficiary designations. There are things you can put on property, transfer on death, payable on death. There
Mm-hmm.
are trusts. But this is why I have a job, right? This is what I talk to my clients about. We ascertain what they have and how we want to get it to certain things. What are their charitable inclinations? And then we put documents in place that effectuate what their goals and wishes are.
So, would someone's financial position dictate what documents they need? For example, if somebody says that's in our community, well, look, I rent an apartment, let's say, and I have a few bank accounts, but I have my spouse listed as the beneficiary and my kids listed as the beneficiary after my spouse, if we die at the same time or something happens to us at the same time. Is there still a necessity to put an estate plan together, or is there some linchpin that is handled? That would be the trigger point for which I want to put this estate plan together.
I mean, it really depends on the facts and circumstances of the situation. I mean, I would opine that having beneficiary designations and some of the very basic things that you're saying, I mean, that is part of an estate plan. And so maybe that is the plan, but it's incumbent on the clients, everyday people to talk to someone, a professional like me who knows what they're talking about to help guide that. I'm not, thankfully, I'm busy enough, and I think a lot of my peers are busy enough that I'm not looking to upsell people or make people's situations more complicated than they need to be. What I'm looking to do is figure out, what is point A and what is point B and what's the best, most efficient, least expensive way to get you from point A to point B.
I've heard nightmare scenarios, and I'm sure you've seen these too, being in the business where someone dies, and unfortunately, they never change their beneficiary situation. They've gotten remarried, but their previous spouse was the one that was the beneficiary, and they never changed it, or they forgot to change it. Is that something that's taken care of within an estate plan, or is that something that is maybe made a little bit easier for the person that dies to handle their estate?
Yeah, great question. So technically, I believe this is true in all 50 states, but technically a divorce invalidates those sorts of beneficiary designations in most non-federal, for most non-federal assets. So like an IRA, this wouldn't apply to. For an IRA, whoever your beneficiary is, even if it's an ex-spouse, they're going to get the asset. But for other things, non-ERISA plans and also any sort of state-based plans, including your estate planning documents, your divorce will invalidate those beneficiary designations. However, where this comes into be a problem is on the practical manifestation of that. So I'll give you an example. We had a client a number of years ago who got divorced, had a life insurance policy. The life insurance policy named this ex-spouse as the beneficiary, as most couples do. To celebrate the divorce, this person went on a cross-country motorcycle ride. And unfortunately, as tends to be the case with motorcycles, there was an accident and this person died. So the ex-spouse calls the life insurance company to check on the status of this policy. Of course, the life insurance company sees that ex-spouse is still the named beneficiary because it's not incumbent on them to check your marital status. And so they paid the claim. So this person's family had to go chase after the ex-spouse for, unjust enrichment and things like that. But now instead of dealing with the insurance company, you're dealing with this person who, has essentially found money, who knows how they're spending it, probably not responsibly. And that litigation, that case is much, much more difficult. So, there's some adulting that needs to go into it. You don't want to rely on the law here because of the practical implications. But I mean, at the very least, in most situations, the law is at least on your side.
Let's talk about step one. Somebody says, hey, what Eido is saying makes complete sense, but I have done nothing so far. What is step one in the process?
I mean, find an estate planning lawyer. That means not your divorce lawyer who also does estate planning, not your cousin who thinks, they took a wills and trust class in law school. This area of the law can be really complicated, and the consequences of getting it wrong can be very high because you only get one chance ultimately to get it right. The documents in place when you pass or when you have an issue of incapacity, those are the documents that are going to be in play. And so you need them to work and be right and be good. We focus on this. A lot of my peers focus on this. So find that attorney that you work well with, that you feel comfortable with, that you think is going to do a good job with them. Call them up, drop them an email, and start that conversation. Every estate planning lawyer is going to have an intake process. Follow along with the process and follow their advice. They're probably going to be very nice people and do a good job.
So once you put this plan in place, as is the case with my attorney that helped me put this plan together, not only did I get this binder that had all of the information, but there's also an electronic copy of this, and I made sure that my kids had access to it, and my girlfriend has access to it also, so they know that they're included in this and helping me with the power of attorney. Would you advise someone to share with whoever you have as you making the power of attorney, you're giving power of attorney to know that they have the power of attorney if something happens to you?
I think it's a good idea to let people know that you've named them in your documents so that there are no surprises. I've dealt in situations, some pretty recently, where people were not informed that they were in the documents, and then it comes as a complete surprise to them, and they're sometimes not mentally or emotionally prepared to engage in that role when called upon. We use an online portal that people can share documents with. It's really
Mm-hmm.
just a matter of giving people passwords and where to log in. And if you change your mind on someone, you can just reset their password and cut off their access. So technology here can be your friend. But I do think it's generally a good idea to not surprise people that you've named them as guardian of your kids, and all of a sudden, surprise, you've got some 7 and 8 year olds showing up at your doorstep.
Oh no. Yeah, we don't want that. I would advise people, I'm not an attorney, but if somebody's dropping kids off at my front step because they've passed, I might want to know that ahead of time. That would probably be a
Yes,
good idea. So I,
agreed.
I know it's hard to say because everything is regional and depending on, attorneys and their offices and all. Is there an estimate that you think that people would be paying if they're putting it together in a estate plan, or is it contingent upon all of the things that we have as components of that estate plan?
So one of the really nice things about estate planning, as opposed to say litigation or divorce or corporate law, is, we generally don't have an adverse party that we're dealing with. We're dealing with the client and their situation. So not every attorney approaches it this way, but I think this is a ripe area of the law for flat fee type work. So we, for example, and we're just an example, there are other people who do it different ways, rather than have the sands of the hourglass run over the course of the engagement, what we do is collect a bunch of information, talk to the client about, what does point A look like, what does point B look like, and then we give them a proposal. Here's what we're going to do, here's where you're at now, here's where we're going to get you, and then we quote it out. And every client is a little bit different based on their circumstances and what they want and what work we're going to do, and the complexity of their assets. But our value proposition is you don't owe us anything until you know exactly what you're going to owe us.
Mm.
Different lawyers do it differently. Maybe some have an a la carte menu. So if you're going to do a will, here's what it costs. If you're going to do a trust, here's what it's going to cost. Other lawyers may give you a range. Other lawyers may charge you by the hour. Here's my billable rate. However much time I'm going to invest in you, that's what it's going to cost. And if you call me more, I'm going to charge you more. For me, I don't like that because I want clients to ask questions and be confident with the documents that they get, but different strokes for different folks.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And you mentioned a couple of the things that are components, it sounds like, of the estate plan. It sounds like there's a will that's involved. There's a power of attorney. You mentioned HIPAA documents and that kind of thing. Is there other, and I think I mentioned this at the beginning, a trust could also be a part of that too. Are there any other components of an estate plan that we should think about?
So I think a typical estate plan for kind of a what I would call a quote unquote normal average client is a revocable trust, pour over wills, some sort of funding mechanism, be it a trust declaration or a marital property agreement, healthcare powers of attorney and health directives, a durable power of attorney, and HIPAA authorizations. I think that works out to somewhere between 12 or 15 documents, depending on some details. That's pretty typical. Some clients require less because they don't need the trust and the trust declaration or marital property agreement. Some clients need more. Of course, there's a lot of tools in our toolbox for things like more advanced trust planning, life insurance trust, things like that. But it really just depends on the client situation and what the laws happen to be. In Illinois or California, where you've got state estate taxes, those are different than how we would approach a client with only federal issues, where the federal estate exemption amount is $15 million this year. In Illinois, the exemption is only $4 million, and then they tax back to the first dollar. So it really just depends on the client and their particular situation.
Now, I know in my case, and there is, believe me, there is no complexity involved in my life. I own my own business. I have a house, and I have children, and I have a girlfriend. I have an ex-wife. So all of these things are.
And some nice cars.
And I have some nice classic cars. I know there's a little bit of complexity involved, but this document that I ended up this binder. It was a couple hundred pages. How important is it? Very, very much like reading a credit card agreement. I'm thinking I've never read a credit card agreement, but I still have credit cards. How often what would be your advice in making sure you understand every word that's in those documents as an attorney that represents me, let's say?
So here's how I approach that. So to me, those documents are actually not for you. because when those documents are being effectuated, you'll either be incapacitated or deceased. And so whether it's your girlfriend or your kids or your other family members or beneficiaries, right, they weren't in any of those meetings that you had with the lawyer that did that for you.
Right.
And so for me, I really like clients to read what I wrote. I don't do 200-page trusts for this very reason, because my approach is that if you read what I wrote and you don't understand it, then the people who are going to implement this have no prayer to understand it, because they won't have even had access to me to hear the explanation or why we did what we did.
Right.
So from a very practical perspective, I don't draft 200-page trusts. I try to really avoid legal mumbo jumbo. I want it to be digestible to my clients so that when I need to actually execute these documents and have them do what they need to do, the people who are doing that, who again are not my client, are going to be able to do that.
Well, I so appreciate you sharing this information. What information should our listening audience know or be aware of that I'm not even thinking of, to ask you, because there is a level of complexity in this that which is why we want to get an attorney involved. What should I be asking you that I'm not asking you?
So I think one of the common things I hear from clients is that they're trying to do their own lawyering online, especially now with AI. So they're hopping online and sort of putting in some prompts and it's spitting out some information to them. That's great, but you don't know what you don't know. There's a reason why I have been doing this for 25 years, and a lot of my peers, some of them even longer than me. There's a reason that we do what we do, how we do it. And so I think it's great to try to educate yourself and go to the lawyers and with a little bit of information and ask the lawyer to explain some more things to you. But don't try to be your own lawyer. Don't try to do this online by yourself. You don't know what it is you don't know. I tell people all the time, there are a lot of self-help websites, and we don't necessarily have to name them now, but if you go in, that system will spit out some documents that sound really legal. The problem is you don't know if some of the prompts, the way you answered them, led you in a certain direction that I wouldn't have advised had I been the one doing it. I can go to those websites and probably direct them to do really great things or know what the deficiencies were when I was doing it, because I'm a professional. And if you're not a professional, you won't be able to have that insight. And so just because you have something that sounds legal may not be great for you. Also, a lot of people, I think, really underestimate the complexity of their lives, because it's their lives, right? It's what they deal with on a day in, day out basis. You don't understand what some of the things in your life are that are complex versus not complex. For you, everything is simple because it's your life. But I think a lawyer with some experience will be able to tell you, this thing that you have is an asset we really need to worry about. I mean, for you, Doug, you were rattling off the things that you thought were super simple, but to me, it's those very cars that you were about to sort of riff right over, because to you, they're just part of your life, where to me, I really care about those cars, not only because I'm a car person, but because I've seen those are the sorts of things that people fight over, not because they're worth a lot, but because you'll be associated with those cars. And maybe somebody in your life is really going to want to go to the mat for that Mustang or the truck or whatever the case may be. Fights don't happen necessarily over money or value. They fight over sentimental things, because that one thing that wouldn't elicit a single bid on eBay, somebody really associates with grandma or grandpa or mom or dad, and they will go to the absolute mat for that asset and pay ridiculous legal fees, because in their mind, it's irreplaceable, irregardless of the fact that has no value to anyone other than maybe them and two other people. But this is where people lose their minds and spend ridiculous legal fees on the fight.
Right. Yeah, I can recall going through divorce in the case, and this was almost 15 years ago, thinking about this money that we're putting into an attorney's pocket is money that our kids are not getting. Let's simplify things a little bit. Let's go into mediation, spend a flat fee, and get it all taken care of. It's really important that you understand, Nice Guy community, the expert that you need when it's time to need an expert. And Eido, before I hit record, I said, hey, what would be a win for you? And you were very kind, and you said, look, I want your audience just to know the importance of doing this. Where can we send people so that they have access to you, or you are not accessible by our community? How does it work for you?
So as a kid, was terrible having a name like Eido, but now as an adult, it's great because you don't even have to spell it right. You can guess how to spell Eido in estate planning and you'll find me. But,
Right.
we're at walnylegal.com. You can Google Eido. It's spelled E-I-D-O, but you don't even have to get that right to find me. But honestly, I am a team player. I think estate planning is so important, whether they call me or some other estate planning lawyer. I mean, just get this done. It will make such a huge difference to you under certain circumstances, but most assuredly to the rest of your family. Don't take this position that I'll be dead, so what do I care? You have loved ones, you care about them. This does make a huge difference. I am speaking from practical experience, not just professional experience. I mean, don't be part of that, 84% that has a bad estate plan or no estate plan. Get into that 16% that's in the right side of that equation.
All right. We have the final word, and we're going to talk about cufflinks for just a
Yep.
moment. Tell me about cufflinks. I want to know, how did you get into that?
So as you probably can tell from my resume, I don't sleep a lot, and that's a fact. I stare at the ceiling a lot when I'm laying in bed. And so one of the things I started doing instead of just staring at the ceiling was work on cars and do some of the other things you rattled off in the introduction. But, I was taking a flight a number of years ago when they still had those magazines on the back seats, the seat in front of you, and saw these really amazing cufflinks made out of women's mechanical wristwatch movements. And they were very expensive, and I'm a little cheap. And so I thought to myself, I could make these. And so after some trial and error, I made a pair, and the managing partner at the firm I was working at the time bought them literally off my shirt the first or second time I wore them to work. So I made another pair, and another lawyer bought those off my shirt, and then I made 30 or 40 pairs. And they've been great. I donate them to charities and auctions when people are trying to raise charitable dollars. I've given them to some Marines for their weddings, and I know recently a client of mine gave them as gifts to a watch company that they had as a client. So they've wound up in really great places. But it's one of those things where instead of staring at the ceiling, I've tried to make the most of the time I've got available. And sometimes it's fixing up cars, and sometimes it's making cufflinks.
That's a great hobby, and I appreciate the story too. And I think it was like Sky Mall, wasn't that the name of
Yes, the Sky Mall.
Sky Mall on the back of the airline seat. So so appreciate you sharing your message and your inspiration. Nice Guy community. We'll make sure we put a link in the show notes so you have access to Eido's website so you can get more information about him and what he does. Eido, thanks for sharing today.
This was awesome. Thanks for having me, Doug.
Hey, Nice Guy community, never underestimate the power of nice. Again, special thanks to Eido Walny. All of his information will be right there in the show notes. Steve O'Brien, go ahead and take us out of here.
You've put enough in little Johnny's 529. Now, it's time to really help out someone in need. The Nice Guys on Business need your support. Please go to patreon.com, and for as little as $2 a month, you can help these guys continue to ramble on and on and on, week after week after week. Thank you for your support. And boy, is it weak.